It's Tuesday, September 23rd, and for the second day in a row, we have a lot of trouble out in the tropics, as well as a really big severe weather system that's expected to make some impacts to the United States today. But starting in the tropics, here is now Category 4 major Hurricane Gabrielle, sustained at 140-mile-an-hour wind speeds in that very close area around the eye. Speaking about the eye, it's very symmetrical, very big, and very organized. This is just a typical look that we see with these really big, very organized major hurricanes. Now, luckily for Bermuda, it missed it entirely, and it's just going to bring some big surf and rip currents. That's also going to be brought to the eastern coast of the United States, but it's now making its turn out to the Atlantic and is not going to harm anybody from now on. But as for the rest of the tropics, we do have two slightly concerning invests. This further easterly one, which has a higher probability of forming and now has an 80% chance of formation, is pretty concerning for anybody that's in Bermuda. This could potentially follow a very similar track to Gabrielle, where it gets very close to Bermuda or skims it or even makes a landfall, then turns out into the Atlantic. It looks pretty likely that this will turn into a hurricane, and even a pretty formidable one. But this further western risk, which currently only has a 50% chance of formation, is going to be the one to watch if you're on the eastern coast of the United States. This could potentially form into a storm, and it could potentially get close or even make impacts to the United States. Now, it's too early to tell if that will happen, but we are going to want to stay very weather aware of this further eastern risk. And here's a little model imagery to kind of recap all of that. This one storm right here is going to be the further kind of easterly risk. This could potentially turn into a pretty big storm going towards Bermuda. And then this little low pressure system right here is going to be the further westerly risk. And we can see the Euro is bringing it pretty close to United States, and it will actually also kind of steer it into the eastern coast of the US as well, but as a pretty weak storm. Now, it's too early to tell if this will happen, but this is just definitely something that's going to remind us to be very weather aware of this storm for the next couple of days. But moving to the mainland US, that big severe weather system from yesterday is going to continue to stick around, bringing a slight risk of severe weather to parts of Arkansas, Oklahoma, and northeastern Texas, as well as a marginal risk, which kind of just expands on the southern plains and then even goes all the way up into parts of Tennessee and then southern Kentucky, then a little isolated marginal risk up here in the DMV and Baltimore region. Now, mostly this is going to be for that conditional threat of some 60 to 70-mile-an-hour gusts, for that probability maxing out in that slight risk area. Then for our hail risk, it's going to be a little different. It's going to be completely non-existent in our DMV and Baltimore risk area, but for our southern plains risk area, we could potentially see 1 to 2 inches of hail. Then for a tornado risk today, it's actually going to be pretty decent in my opinion. It's really going to be centered on this portion of far eastern Oklahoma and then western Arkansas, where I believe we could actually have the potential for even a strong tornado today. And here's some model data on how this could potentially unfold today. It's going to be brought by this really big low pressure system, bringing a lot of favorable shear for storms and even potentially tornadoes along a front right here. This front's actually going to extend all the way down into parts of Texas, where we'll actually have a secondary low pressure system, which will initiate some storms later in the day. But the main thing to look at is going to be this storm complex right here in parts of far eastern Oklahoma and Arkansas. At first, they'll be more discreet, bringing more of that threat for hail and tornadoes before they kind of turn into that cluster where it just becomes a lot of outflowy storms, bringing some potentially strong gusts and then potentially a couple of spin up tornadoes as well. And then as we go further into the night, that risk is going to kind of move more west along our cold front into other parts with other embedded low pressure systems. We kind of see it along southern Oklahoma and all the way back into the Texas panhandle. Those storms would likely just be for some damaging winds and potentially even that threat of some small hail. Then moving a bit more to the east in our DMV and Baltimore risk area, it's really not looking like there's going to be a ton. It's just going to be a conditional risk for some severe weather as we have a low pressure system kind of moving up along an area of troughing, potentially bringing a band of a couple of organized storms, potentially even being severe to the region. And then further out in our more western risk area, there's just going to be a potential for some severe storms, mostly just some disorganized clusters in front of that big low pressure system in parts of Tennessee and Kentucky as well. And our big trough is going to be the main cause of a lot of that severe weather today. We're going to have a bit of potentially a small shortwave pushing through that DMV and Baltimore region area, potentially bringing that threat for a couple of storms, maybe even initiating them. And then we just have this big area of flow over our main risk area with a couple of embedded short waves. That's going to be the main cause for our severe weather today. And this is the environment in our main risk area for severe weather. And this is actually looking quite good to produce all hazards. We have a low enough cloud base, quite a bit of 3 Cape, and just very favorable shear for tornadoes. This is the reason why I think we'll definitely see a couple of tornadoes and even potentially a strong one, as well as our low level shear. Our bulk shear, organizing shear, is looking very favorable for some organized storms. Our wind veering is also going to help with that quite a bit. So potentially some strong updrafts producing some large hail as well. For that large hail, we have quite a bit of Cape up here near our freezing level. Then our mid-level lapse rates are going to be quite good at 7.5 Celsius, decreasing per kilometer. For that damaging wind risk, we have a precipitable water that's pretty solid, as well as quite a bit of dry air loft. And then just whenever there's organized storms, that risk for damaging winds is going to be elevated. Now, just for general severe weather, we have a very moist environment coupled with a pretty unstable environment, actually around 3,000 Cape. That's going to be very favorable for severe weather as well. And then capping off on our photograph, we have that classic curve, then elongation out that we do see on some severe weather days that potentially produce some tornadoes. Moving a bit west along our cold front into parts of southern Oklahoma and Texas, this would be for the area that sees those storms in the later hours, potentially in the early night. And we're just going to see a moist enough environment with definitely enough Cape to potentially produce some severe hazards, as well as a higher precipitable water and a pretty decent downdraft Cape. And then even a nice amount of some bulk shear. So potentially some organized storms just initiated along that trough and cold front, mostly bringing that threat for a couple of isolated damaging gusts, maybe some small hail. Then that threat for tornadoes is likely going to be pretty much 0 at this point. And for our last environment in the DMV and Baltimore region, not really much to talk about here other than a moist enough environment with definitely enough Cape to see some thunderstorms potentially even being severe. I think that risk out here is going to be mostly conditional, but I'd still expect some strong thunderstorms, bringing potentially a couple of severe gusts in that 60-mile-an-hour range.